Welcome to an introduction to information sharing, XML, and other standards. In this video, we're going to talk about what information sharing is and why you should do it. We'll talk about what XML is and why you should use that for your information sharing. And then we'll talk about other standards that utilize XML to do information sharing. Let's get started. An overall outline, we're going to talk about the benefits of information sharing. And nowadays these are pretty much accepted. We're still going to cover them, but everybody's kind of on board with information sharing. We'll talk about the role of XML inside the context of information sharing. We'll do a demonstration of an XML-based exchange. We actually set up a little demonstration system to run through what one looks like. And we'll close by looking at some of the current efforts in governmental data sharing. The big benefit of information sharing is that you get better data. And if you have better data, you can make better decisions. Of course, information sharing also means more transparency, which leads to more accountability. And when we're talking about information sharing, we're talking about doing it via exchanges. We're not talking about letting everybody into your internal database to look at your information. We're talking about you exchanging selected bits of your information with another entity. And that means that you don't have to have changes to your internal processes, systems, or databases. You don't have to change how you do things internally because you're not letting people come into your internal system. Rather, you're just exchanging information. So that makes things a lot easier. It also makes things more secure, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. Sharing information electronically simply leads to better data. More timely data, after all, data moves at darn near the speed of light, not quite, but close. More reliable data, you know where the data is coming from, and we have all sorts of electronic means to ensure that it's reliable. Higher quality data, again, you're getting it electronically from somebody, and you're getting data that they've put together specifically for you. And then finally, more securely. You're getting data that's more secure, both in terms of being able to be protected while it's being sent to you, as well as having your own data more securely kept. Better data, in turn, leads to better services. And that's true whether you're protecting a nation or protecting a child. If you have better data, you can provide better services. You can also gain operational savings. You're not wasting money doing dumb things based on poor data, and you can increase effectiveness and increase communication. And these are all good things. These are all things you get when you have better data available to you. Security is also a big concern, and exchanging information turns out to be safer than allowing people access to your information. A very good example of this is the recent WikiLeaks scandal. WikiLeaks was a case of a failure of access, not a failure of information exchange. This was a case where one person had access to far more information than he needed, and he sucked up all that information and then handed it out willy-nilly. That's a different thing than information exchange. In an information exchange context, he would only be receiving the information that he needed via an exchange. And he wouldn't have access to everything. He wouldn't have been able to suck out reams and reams of information from an information source and then share that with people that were not supposed to have it. So information sharing makes data safer because you can define and limit what's shared. Here's a quick example to illustrate what I'm talking about. Which is more secure? Letting somebody come into your house and rummage around for the data they need? Or you going into your house, determining what things from your house you're going to share, and then explicitly sending that information to somebody else? Clearly, exchanging the information is safer. Even if everything in your house is locked down with padlocks, it's still safer if you just extract what somebody else needs rather than letting them rummage through your house. So information sharing, it's a good thing. Now, what's the role of XML in the context of information sharing? Well, to discover that, we're going to talk about a few things. What XML is, what its origin is, what its purpose is, and how it can help you. XML itself is an extensible markup language. It's a language for marking up documents containing structured information. So you can tag things as having certain meanings. The markup language is a bunch of words and symbols, describes the different pieces of a document. The tags themselves describe the different parts. So in a document context, you'd have tags marking a paragraph and tags marking a heading. It's not a fixed format like HTML is. In other words, the tags themselves aren't defined. What XML does is let you define tags. So you could use XML to build something like HTML or to build whatever kind of tagging language you needed for your particular needs. But it lets you make up your markup from scratch. and it lets you take existing work and build upon it. And that's where the extensible, that's what the X means. I mean, X doesn't mean extreme, it means extensible. It means you can take things that already exist and add more things to them. XML is also self-describing, or at least it should be. When you're making tags to mark up information, those tags should represent the content they hold. So here an example is a tag that says first name, and it marks, basically the tags surround somebody's first name, in this case Tommy. Now you could make that tag be ABCD, but it wouldn't be very meaningful. XML's origin is basically for marking up documents. In the past, there was a markup language called the Standard Generalized Markup Language, SGML. And, well, SGML is kind of a beast. It's a huge markup language for marking up documents. And in the past, there were tons and tons of documents marked up this way. But what somebody realized was that it was really difficult to deal with. And if you took 20% of SGML, you could still get 80% of the functionality. In other words, you could simplify SGML a lot without losing a lot of functionality. And that's where XML comes from. It allows users to create any tags they need. There is a layer on top of XML called XML schema that then describes the structure and content of those tags. In other words, XML are rules for how to build tags. XML schema provides rules for what those tags should say and how those tags should fit together. XML was originally designed for semi-structured environments, documents and publications. That's what it was for, again, from its SGML days. But now it's widely used for information sharing across all sorts of different information systems. And what's important is that it's a public format. It's not a proprietary format. It's not owned by a company. You can use XML and you don't have to pay anybody for the privilege of using it. It's totally open and public, and that's a powerful incentive towards its use. So now that we know where XML comes from, what's its purpose? Well, it can actually do a lot of things. It's good for information identification. You define your own tags marking what the information is, and it lets you provide meaningful names for that information. It works for information storage. It's portable and non-proprietary. It's all basically text in XML. That makes it platform apathetic. It really doesn't care what platform it's on. And in fact, pretty much any platform today will support XML. I like to say even COBOL supports XML, and it's true, COBOL does. You can do XML in pretty much anything, on pretty much anything. And because it's an international open standard, you can be sure that any data you save as XML today will be readable and accessible tomorrow. XML is also good for basically defining structure. XML itself is naturally hierarchical, so it fits really well with a lot of types of information that we have that too are naturally hierarchical. But XML isn't bound to hierarchy either. It can be used to do all sorts of relationships between objects. So while it's good for marking down a hierarchical structure, it's not limited to that. XML is also great for data transfer, letting you encapsulate information and exchange it between different and totally disparate computing systems. Doesn't matter what the computers at each end are running. Doesn't matter the hardware, doesn't matter the software, doesn't matter the operating system. Because XML is such a widespread standard, you can use it to transfer data back and forth. It's just a common language for communication and sending messages back and forth. To bootstrap off messaging, it's widely used in web services on the internet today. Thousands of online services use XML behind the scenes to exchange information. You're looking at a web page in your browser, but the web page itself is continually talking to back-end data sources, and often it's using XML to do that. XML is not the only way it can do that, but it's certainly a very, very common means of exchanging information. And with proper formatting added, and there's a variety of technologies for doing that, XML can also be directly displayed in a pleasing manner for humans to see. So, how does XML help? Well, all those features of XML make it superbly suited to the task of exchanging information. It lets you describe and identify your information accurately and unambiguously by having meaningful tags around information. It can also represent structure as well. It's understandable for computers, but also for humans. It's a really nice format in that computers can parse it because of the rules of XML, but humans can also eyeball it and get an idea. It provides a common syntax for exchanging information, and that's really important.